The security job was supposed to be her peaceful retirement, a place where her love of art could flourish without the stress of tracking international criminals. But when Elena started noticing discrepancies in the museum's inventory records and recognized forgeries hanging where originals should be, she knew her law enforcement days weren't over. Welcome to Whispers of Lives. Before we begin this incredible story of a museum security guard whose gentle guidance once helped recover the world's most stolen masterpieces, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe that true protectors never stop guarding what's precious to humanity, hit that subscribe button and share this story to help us honor those who preserve our cultural treasures from the shadows. Elena Vasquez adjusted her navy blue security uniform and checked her earpiece, the same routine she'd followed every morning for the past 3 years at the Riverside Metropolitan Museum. The job was everything she'd hoped for when she left federal law enforcement: quiet, surrounded by beauty, far removed from the violent world of international art smuggling that had consumed 8 years of her life. She walked through the Renaissance wing, her trained eyes automatically cataloging each piece, as she had since her first day. Caravaggio's The Fortune Teller in its climate-controlled case, the brushstrokes catching morning light that filtered through the museum skylights. Botticelli's Madonna and Child, positioned perfectly to showcase the artist's delicate technique. The collection was modest compared to the Met or the Louvre, but every piece was authentic, valuable, and irreplaceable. At least, they were supposed to be. Elena paused in front of the Monet water lily painting that had bothered her for weeks. Something was wrong with it, a subtle wrongness that nagged at her professional instincts. The brushwork was close, the colors nearly perfect, but there was a flatness to the texture that shouldn't exist in an original Monet. She'd seen enough forgeries during her FBI years to recognize the signs, but confronting that suspicion meant acknowledging that her peaceful retirement might be over. "Morning, Elena," called Sarah Chun, one of the younger security guards. "Early bird as always, I see." "Old habits," Elena replied with a smile, moving away from the Monet. "How was the overnight shift?" "Quiet as always, though we had that weird delivery thing again around 3 a.m. Third time this month someone's bringing in restoration supplies in the middle of the night." Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Restoration supplies?" "Yeah, Dr. Patterson authorized it. Said something about special climate-controlled materials that have to be transported during specific temperature conditions." Sarah shrugged. "Above my pay grade, but it seems weird to me." Dr. Richard Patterson was the museum's chief curator, a respected scholar who'd built the Riverside's reputation through careful acquisitions and meticulous preservation. Elena had worked with him for 3 years without any concerns, but Sarah's comment triggered alarm bells that Elena had been trying to ignore. Who handled the delivery? Patterson himself, along with that new assistant curator, Marcus Webb. They spent about 2 hours in the restoration room. Then everything was locked up tight. Sarah checked her watch. "Speaking of which, I should head home. Double shift tomorrow because Jenkins called in sick again." After Sarah left, Elena walked purposefully toward the administrative offices. She'd avoided investigating her suspicions for weeks, hoping they were just paranoia born from too many years chasing art criminals. But her training had taught her that instincts were data, and ignoring data got artifacts stolen and criminals free. The restoration room was locked, as always, but Elena had master keys as head of security. She slipped inside, noting immediately that the space smelled wrong. Not the usual mix of solvents and varnishes, but something sharper, more chemical. On the work table sat a painting she didn't recognize, a small landscape that looked vaguely impressionist, but wrong in ways she couldn't immediately identify. Beside it lay tools that had nothing to do with restoration, precision scales, chemical testing equipment, and most telling of all, a UV light setup used for authenticating artwork. Elena photographed everything with her phone, her FBI training overriding 3 years of civilian caution. She learned to document first, theorize later, because evidence had a way of disappearing when criminal networks realized they were being watched. She was examining the landscape more closely when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Elena quickly shut off the lights and moved to the door, listening as voices approached. "The Monet should be ready for transport by Friday," Dr. Patterson was saying. "Webb's work is exceptional. Even I can barely tell the difference." "What about the Degas?" The second voice belonged to someone Elena didn't recognize, accented in a way that suggested Eastern European origins. "Next week. These things take time if you want them done properly." Elena's blood chilled as the implications crystallized. Patterson wasn't just stealing artwork. He was replacing originals with forgeries, creating perfect replicas that could hang undetected for years, while the real masterpieces disappeared into private collections. She slipped out of the restoration room before the voices got closer, her mind racing through everything she'd observed over the past 3 years. The after-hours deliveries, Patterson's increased interest in inventory management, the subtle wrongness she'd noticed in several pieces, but dismissed as imagination. The Riverside Metropolitan Museum was being systematically looted by its own chief curator. Elena made it back to the main gallery before Patterson and his companion appeared, forcing herself to maintain the relaxed posture of someone conducting routine security rounds. Patterson nodded pleasantly as he passed, the same professional greeting he'd given her hundreds of times. But now she saw him differently. Not a dedicated scholar, but a criminal who'd spent 3 years operating under her nose while she tried to enjoy a peaceful retirement. In her office, Elena pulled up the museum's insurance database and cross-referenced it with the FBI's Stolen Art Registry, a database she technically no longer had access to but whose login credentials still worked. What she found made her stomach turn. For paintings currently hanging in the Riverside Metropolitan were listed as stolen in international databases. The Monet that had bothered her was actually a known forgery that had disappeared from a Prague auction house 2 years ago. The Degas that Patterson's visitor had mentioned was on Interpol's most wanted list, stolen from a private collector in Switzerland. Elena wasn't looking at a simple theft operation. This was an international art laundering scheme, using the museum as a front to legitimize stolen masterpieces while simultaneously creating forgeries of the museum's own collection. She reached for her phone to call the FBI, then stopped. Her contacts at the Bureau were probably still active, but she'd been out of law enforcement for 3 years. Making accusations against a respected curator without ironclad evidence could destroy both Patterson's career and her own credibility. She needed more proof. Over the next week, Elena conducted her own investigation, using skills she'd hoped never to need again. She documented delivery schedules, photographed suspicious activities, and built a timeline of artwork movements that revealed the scope of Patterson's operation. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. Patterson would acquire stolen artwork through international contacts, then create forgeries of pieces in the museum's permanent collection. The stolen art would be discovered in estate sales or private collections, complete with forged provenance documents that made them appear legitimate. Meanwhile, the original museum pieces would disappear into private collections, replaced by forgeries that could hang undetected for decades. Elena's investigation revealed at least 12 stolen pieces currently displayed as legitimate acquisitions, and 6 museum originals that had been replaced with forgeries. The operation had been running for at least 2 years, generating millions in profits while undermining the integrity of one of the region's most respected cultural institutions. "I'm afraid this can't wait until Monday. You see, Ms. Vasquez, we know exactly who you are." Elena's training kicked in automatically. When criminals discovered they were being investigated by law enforcement, they became desperate and dangerous. Patterson's tone carried the quiet menace of someone who'd moved beyond academic crime into territory where people got hurt. "I'm not sure what you mean." Elena Vasquez, former special agent, FBI Art Crime Team. 8 years investigating international art theft and forgery. Retired 3 years ago after the Kessler case in Vienna. We've known about your background since the day you applied for the security position. Elena's mind raced through the implications. If Patterson had known her identity from the beginning, then her hiring wasn't coincidence. It was strategic. Having a former FBI art crime specialist on staff provided legitimacy and cover for his operation, while simultaneously placing his greatest threat under direct observation. Recognized. This is Special Agent Martinez, FBI Art Crime Team. The building is surrounded. All individuals inside are required to remain stationary, with hands visible. Patterson's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally resignation as he realized that his carefully constructed operation was falling apart. How long have they been listening? Since the moment you threatened me, Dr. Patterson. The FBI takes threats against former agents very personally. Tactical officers flooded into the Renaissance wing, weapons drawn and voices commanding immediate compliance. Patterson and his associates were secured quickly, professionally, with the efficiency Elena remembered from her operational days. Special Agent Martinez approached Elena as the suspects were being processed. "Nice work, Elena. We've been tracking this network for 18 months, but we couldn't penetrate their security until you provided inside access." 18 months? Carlos, why didn't you tell me? Because you were retired, and because we needed someone inside who could act naturally without knowing they were part of an operation. Your genuine reactions to discovering the fraud were exactly what we needed to draw Patterson into making mistakes. Elena stared at her former colleague, understanding dawning. "You've been using me too. We've been protecting an important investigation while keeping you safe. When we learned that Patterson had specifically recruited you because of your background, we realized you were either a target or an asset. We chose to make you an asset." Elena looked around the gallery where she'd worked for 3 years, now filled with federal agents and evidence teams processing what would become one of the largest art crime busts in FBI history. The job that was supposed to be her peaceful retirement had become the capstone operation of her law enforcement career. What happens to the museum? The legitimate pieces stay, the stolen artwork gets returned to rightful owners, and the forgeries become evidence. The Riverside Metropolitan will survive, probably with enhanced credibility once the story becomes public. Elena nodded, watching as agents carefully documented and packaged artwork that represented hundreds of years of human creativity. Some pieces would return to their homes, others would find new places in legitimate collections. All would be preserved for future generations to appreciate. "Carlos, am I really retired this time?" "That depends. The art crime team could use someone with your expertise and proven ability to work undercover in cultural institutions." Elena considered the offer, then looked at the forged Monet that had started her investigation. 3 years of peaceful retirement had been pleasant, but watching cultural treasures being stolen and replaced with lies had reminded her why she joined law enforcement in the first place. "I'll think about it. But first, I want to make sure every piece of stolen artwork in that warehouse gets back where it belongs." Because sometimes the most important investigations happen in museums, conducted by security guards who remember too much and see too clearly. Sometimes protecting culture means trading peaceful retirement for the dangerous work of fighting criminals who would steal humanity's shared heritage. Elena Vasquez had tried to retire from the FBI, but the FBI had never retired from her.